well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. We are so back that my back actually hurts from doing this once more under the breach. But we are back to conclude our first book in our series of Do You Even Read? As we conclude the third and final part of Thomas Moynihan's 2019 text, Spinal Catastrophism, A Secret History. Dimes, how are you?
I'm doing good. I love that intro. So some people might be noticing that we're hosting this a bit different. New background, logo, everything. But you have to understand that Prude does the best intros. I've never been able to figure it out. I've been doing this for years. And what I spared you just there was going live, going, hi, we live? Hey, hi, what, yeah. So thank you so much, Prude, for taking the reins on this once again and causing irreparable harm to our audience, because this is the third and final entry of the Spinal Catastrophism series. And I've been inundated. I don't know about you, but I've been inundated by DMs and messages about the people suffering in good ways, sometimes saying this is breaking my mind. Some people are having their faith challenged. Everyone's got a spine complaint, like, oh, my back aches, but I know that it is. I know that this is digging its claws right into people's spines. And, anyone can make someone laugh on the mic, but it's very rare that two people can come together and inflict trauma like this. And it might be for the first time ever at this scale. So I'm just proud to be part of it.
Well, speaking of suffering, I think that it is important for the audience to look down below in the description for today and go to the goodsuffer.com website, and you will find the wonderful merch store that Dimes and other associated creators are a part of. If you're interested in some Jay Burden stickers, if you want to find a beaver that will really love you back, that will be the place to go. And by all means, check out all the wonderful links down below in the description, both on my channel, but as well as wherever Dimes may be hosting this lovely thing. I think we're hosting this on X and as well as his Blood Satellite channel. So we're here to have a really good time, and let's go just crack our backs and let's get into this third part and move on.
Yeah, and I think we were talking about this beforehand, that the third part is probably the shortest, but it does tie everything together. So I had limited notes on this one, but they are the notes that I call back to the most in reference to this. And it summarizes itself in a way that I think was missing in the first and second parts. But just to tee this up, I remember when I was talking about this the first time on Blood Satellite, I was just ripping right through it and couldn't really pause on any particular part. I made the comment, I'm curious to see what you think about this. I made the comment that I see this as a very nihilistic work. And by nihilistic, I don't just mean dark and edgy, but the real root of this thing is, of course, in trauma, but where it goes by the end of it, in this, the purpose of intelligence, it seems to be glorious self-destruction. Like, we're wondering, where is this all leading? Where is this grand, mechanism, the scheme that we're talking about lead us, and it seems to lead to somewhere pretty dark. Would you agree, or did I have the completely wrong reading on this?
No, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. The ending of the text, building off of Schopenhauer and others that he has been citing for the first 2/3 of the book, he just comes to this glorious idea of voluntary extinction, basing off of the writings of theosophists as well as some Russian mystic writers as well. And it takes a pretty dark turn, because it's just basically that we are able to perceive our own suffering, and we only understand the world by this existence of trauma. Therefore, why not just return to a lower form of evolution? And if we can't do that, why not just sail off into the great beyond? And it's almost like just not to be too crass, but it's almost like just a complete ruined intellectual orgasm, wherein it's all this fun schizoanalysis in the first 2/3, and then it ends in this glorious, petite mort, except it's not a little death anymore. It's just this giant human-wide voluntary extinction movement.
Yeah, and because you're thinking that this starts with trauma, this starts with a hostile universe, and you're thinking, well, where could this lead? Is there a redemption involved? And there's not so much redemption as I would interpret it as revenge. And I'm sure that Mr. Moynihan wouldn't view it that way. But I guess I could just summarize it. Do you want to just get into it? Do you want to start reading some
Yeah,
lines?
let's do it. This is the shortest section of the book, which is the last third, as well as this interesting postscriptum. And I like some of the comments in here. Is just like the end state of the theory cell, and there's a little bit of truth to that. I would argue for sure. And I think, however, that this does tee up Moynihan's second book, X Risk, and it's sort of this book about the history of how humanity has perceived its own extinction as a species and the risks that come with that, whether it's climate change or religious apocalypticism, as well as AGI, the paperclip maximizer. Whereas in this book, it's literally what Haziel is saying in the chat. It's revenge against the earth, revenge against the gods for birthing us. Because in building off of both Christian texts, but as well as other theosophical works, if all of creation groaneth and travaileth, then clearly the way to end that is to bring about the return by just all dying.
Yeah, and if you start from a position of what you are is embodied suffering, there can be no escape from that. You can only maximize the suffering to such a point that it encompasses everything, which is really what he's saying. Like you become embodied destruction. So it's not even like committing suicide. It's not even like I'm going to kill myself and take reality with me. It's something far more extreme where the way he describes it, and we'll get to this a bit later, but it's like your intelligence advances to such a level where you become a big bang and cause your own, I guess, like feedback loop creation. It gets really trippy later. I've got access to some very, very good comments here. I just wanted to just thank you very much, Big Ben. Loving the self-sucking skeleton in the thumbnail. I didn't interpret that, but that would be on point for kind of what we're talking about here. So I don't know if you had any notes. Do you want to just start reading it here? We've got the first part of part 3 pulled up here.
Yeah, we can do that. There's not too much I have in this particular section until maybe maybe the second or third page down, right before we get into Kant. But yeah, we can just get started and go from there. Yeah, let's see here. Scroll up just a tad, and then we can start right there. Perfect. Deliriously preoccupied with disaffiliating. There we go. Thanks. With disaffiliating reason and nature, Kant climaxes with the proclamation that orthograde rationality is actually antithetical to the ends of the species' procreation, and thus human survival itself. For gravity's trawl along the terrestrial spinal axis is the cause of the prolapsed uterus. Nature's first foresight, he propounds, must have designed humanity for quadrupedalism, and thus to protect the fetus according to preserve our kind. Standing upright is truly steadfast standing, therefore defiant to the point of species suicide. Ergo, only after the germ of something alien entered, the germ of reason, as Kant puts it, did man fall upward. Yanked to its feet by the stern, the inflexible puppet master, reason, nature literally miscarries itself within human morphology. Here is the overemphasis on rationality's exogeneity deviates into epidemiology. It is the virus come from outside. Indeed, to ordain reason's arrival as antagonistic to its interest of life that hosts, it is to notice that intelligence is a parasite. Because parasite dwells within, yet also in spite of. Parasites assert their own antagonistic ends, whilst being utterly dependent for their existence upon their host. And that's really the big takeaway out of this whole section here is the building off the Kantian idea that our ability to reason, our ability to communicate, to self-perceive, to have the ability to perceive pain is literally because intelligence is not human. It does not come from us. We are meant to be a lower beast. We are meant to be stupid. We are meant to be like the irrational beasts of the field, but instead, something has come upon us, and we are cursed with reason.
Yeah, and you start to see the early rumblings of what we just talked about leading into this, which is that him saying that by embracing or being puppeted upward by reason and rebelling against the world, because that's a theme that comes back to in the book. Like us standing upright is like a rebellion against the planet itself. It's also embracing a form of suicide. And so it's crazy. It's almost anti-life to stand upright and subject the fetus and the womb to extra danger. It's like there's this sort of synthesized idea there, which is the more you advance upward, the more you're trying to escape the planet and escape the trauma of the planet. You almost embrace being more and more suicidal. I don't think he outright says that, but you can tell in this book, anytime he italicizes something, you're in for some shit. And so I think that's really, I didn't even get that very much on the first reading, but reading it the second time, you start knowing where it goes. You start seeing him tease that out earlier and earlier. And that's an interesting idea, that humanity, as it's trying to, hold dominion over Earth, it is simultaneously trying to escape Earth. We're always trying to, and maybe this doesn't apply to every group on Earth, but let's just say Westerners, as we achieve, for better or worse, dominion over our environment, we're thrusting ourselves out into space. We're always putting ourselves into further and further danger. And in trying to defeat entropy, we're kind of attracting more entropy towards us, in a sense, due to the complexity of our civilization. So I actually like that idea. Like a lot of this book, there's interesting ideas that I don't think you really get anywhere else. What do you think about that?
Yeah, again, as we mentioned in episode 2, that this is, and I like this phrase that is used here in the section, ontological austerity. There is no room for any real teleological or ontological grounding at all, outside of perhaps some of the decadent romantics that he cites in this section. But there really is no room for a creator myth, or even just the story of creation and the incarnation in a Christian sense. This is very materialistic. This is very coldness, be my God kind of material. So I like this ontological austerity phrase, because I feel like that applies very much to this whole text. We are exploring deep history, deep time, but through some really schizophrenic hermeneutics. And that's sort of an important thing to consider here. Like, intelligence is a foreign entity that has captured a species that, by the nature of our design, we have been scraping upward against our body, and we are, living in this sort of not fully symbiotic relationship, as a parasite is not always beneficial to you. If it's never, it's why it's a parasite. But at the same time, we now have to live with the fact that we've been endowed by this germ, or this parasite, rationality, perception, and understanding that we suffer all the time.
Yeah, and so I guess I also have a segment here. It's on page 206.
But before you do that, there's this, just because of the memes that have been going on Twitter, I feel inclined to reference this one little section here. Yeah, right there. So the infall of time generality into a time-bound body, from the perspective of that body, can be nothing than a petrification from without, beginning at the pineal gland. The kingdom of ends is a crystal world. Remember, guys, if you don't like and share the stream, it's 10,000 years in the crystals. So gotta listen to what Dimes has to say.
I just want to finish that. The time-bound articulation of eternity, which the blossom is, yeah. So I don't think I need to go too much deeper into that. I just want to skip ahead to page.
Don't you love these like fish, the fish porn, right, with Kant up there? That was fun.
Let's go make sure people get.
Look at that. Look at his gills.
Yeah, and he's got that a lot
of this water all over again.
With the CCRU, this fascination with Atlantis and like water creatures and Lovecraft. There's a lot of Lovecraftian stuff in there. Kant's lost gill slits is the subtitle here. And so, I remember there's a comment that was up here, someone saying, I just want to call this to attention. Having not watched the first 2 parts, I'm sure I'll understand it more or less. And to that guy, I say, look at Kant's lost gill slits.
10,000 years in the crystals.
Yeah. There's like an interesting, the through line to all these thinkers is the fascination with fetal development and our like previous aquatic nature.
I love this section though. Because I think about the sensitive young man. Schopenhauer admired Kant's curved spinal repose, which he hypothesized owed to the encumbrance of an abnormally large brain. One cannot help but notice Schopenhauer attempting to emulate the drooping Kantian posture in his daguerreotype portraits, head bent forward, skull resting on hand, supporting the weight of his genius. He is seen propping up his colossal cranium in his palm, proudly signaling that his gray matter contains an entire cosmos of wills and reputations.
Like, I don't know. I'm not a Schopenhauer scholar, and we covered will and representation on the show before. But like, everything I learn about Schopenhauer makes me think I would hate this guy in real life. He's such a fucking dweeb. He's such a weird guy. Like, he's trying to emulate a guy's spinal shape. Like, oh, my brain's too heavy. Everybody, shut the fuck up, Schopenhauer.
The only thing I feel bad because the only thing I've read about Schopenhauer is on women.
Yeah, he's the least pussy-gettingest philosopher you've ever heard, and he's got some competition. He's notorious among philosophers for being bad with women, like compared to Nietzsche, because at least he died of syphilis, so he had sex once, right? I guess. But Schopenhauer, I mean, look, I don't want to turn this into an anti-Schopenhauer thing. You can get that in many places.
But no, you can get into this section with the brain is opening the second volume of his master work. The high priest of pessimism wrote of the immensity of endless space, before swiftly reminding the reader that all this first instance was only a phenomenon of the brain. No wonder why he had a heavy head. Nonetheless, his braggadocious admiration for a big brain, his own included, Schopenhauer was arguably the first philosopher to develop the consequences of telic antagonism between intelligence and vitality, scouring off Kant's sanguine gloss and extruding the more pessimistic entailments. This, we shall see, emerges as an almost inevitable result of Kantian purism. That is, in a certain strain of post-Kantian German idealist thinking was always bound to veer off in this direction. But for those that may want to know what the hell that all means, telic is not just a awful footwear brand, but it means towards an end or an outcome, or actions that lead to a specific end goal. So the end goal being antagonistic is, I think, an important thing to consider here.
Well, that's interesting, and he mentioned something that if you had spent any time in this online space or with this discourse, you see the antagonism between, what do you say, intelligence and vitality. That should sound very familiar to people. That's a perennial issue that we're talking about. And I do like if you look at Spinal Catastrophism, this model, it is like intelligence succeeding over vitality, I think, because he's saying that intelligence is almost rebellion against vitality itself, because vitality would attempt to be at one with nature, would maybe try and immerse itself in the trauma and the chaos, or be kind of lateral with it, whereas we're choosing to rebel against that by choosing intelligence over vitalism. And I do wonder, he doesn't get to this in the book, and maybe he doesn't give a shit about this, but if one could prevent, is it our destiny to always try and destroy the universe with our intelligence, or would there be a way to retreat back into a more vitalistic form, or are we doomed to always be antagonistic towards something like natural animalistic vitalism? He doesn't get into that here, but it's an interesting thought.
No, but you see the conclusion of where that thought comes from, though, wherein it essentially boils down to that suicidal ideation that Moynihan cites for the remainder of this section. And it gets incredibly frustrating because you notice that the previous writers that he's citing, building off this history of human trauma throughout the human race's existence, and is buried in the spine, these lower forms of thinking that we regress to when we're mentally ill or we're shell-shocked or whatever. And a lot of these other writers, especially the English writers that he's mentioning in the first two sections, are far more vitalistic. They're these naturalists and these natural science guys that are like, well, we're understanding how the world works. We're understanding how we can overcome these things. And if we can look back, there is this prototype that can bring us towards the future. And then here we get this like strange veering off into these sort of, pessimistic romantics that are just ready to die.
And you know what? This is an interesting point. And I think it's important to include some criticism towards the book in these. I got into it last time with, does the formation of the spine actually mirror the formation of the planet Earth? We won't repeat that, but like you just said there about, the natural philosophy school, where these are science-minded guys. And I don't think you can really just take what you want from them and excluding all this stuff, like you said. And furthermore, and this is a big one, in reading this, and we're almost at the end now, I don't get the sense, at least from reading it, that he has much interest in how the spine actually works. I think he's using it more as an occult diagram, and you'll see diagrams throughout where here's a picture of a spine and a bunch of fucking symbols pointed to the lumbar. But he has that line, that segment early in the book, which is, let us spelunk down the larynx, let us investigate the spine. And he was kind of poetically tying, going down the spine as if you're going back in time. I'm like, yes, words that are associated with the spine. You looked at an anatomy book, but nowhere in this book does he indicate that he knows what the spine is or does. No, there's not a sign. He's not looking at the spine from a scientific perspective, from a natural philosophy perspective. He's just kind of borrowing a shape and kind of connecting it to another shape and creating this, I would call it a cult, because he mentions George Bataille, or Jorge Bataille, I don't know how to pronounce it, but there's a lot of like weird, trippy occult stuff. A lot of the CCRU writings were very friendly, or at least interested in occult, numerology, demonology, and just kind of using that in there. I wouldn't call it satanic. I think I would just call it...
even their hated, almost a Lucifer Morningstar-esque philosopher Nick Land, who is, on the right, he still dabbles in all that like gematria numerology shit about like Trump. Like he's almost like Donnie Darkened posting with how he like we'll take the gematria and just apply it to whatever news is going on in the world. And he's like, yep, called it. Divine providence strikes again. The Anglo will rise once more. And you're like, okay, Nick.
That's the thing about Nick Land. Once you do stuff like that, I'm like, oh, are you just saying the words divine providence or solemn providence in a way? Like, I thought that was from a Christian perspective. Is this just pop numerology? Is this just a word you found? Like it's a drawing you found?
He's got some fun. What's the word I'm looking for? He has some fun. It was like, let's take Calvinism, but then like let's just slap a whole bunch of Jewish numerology on top of it.
Well, I see the same thing happen with astrology and whatnot. And like, yeah, I know it's fun. It's fun in the way like a teenager, it's fun in the same way that Bam Margera invented his own language. He invented, what was it called? Strigoli, which is like, he just made the letter A look like a more twisted, spirally fucked up letter A. I'm like, yeah, I can see at one point that was cool. Done
because he would like wake up in the middle of the night and like write a thought down and it wouldn't be fully formed.
Probably. I mean, he has pickled his brain with alcohol and also dented it with skateboards. So, I mean, it could be a lot of things. I don't know. I'm just letting I'm letting too much blood satellite seep into this, talking about an asshole I know about. But same thing, it's when you look at stuff like this, books like this, I think there's very interesting history philosophy in here, but then there's also just stuff that I think he slapped on top. Because I find it hard to believe that anyone really goes that deep. They're not Styx Hexenhammer. They're not really getting into occult stuff. It's just like, oh, this is like a comic book thing that I can... Like, no one's using numerology to predict Trump. Wives. Yeah, exactly. This is now the Kino Casino.
Oh, no.
And Gio's out somewhere fucking shaking his fist at the ceiling, the low ceiling of his apartment. Gio shaking his fist at the sky and hitting the tiles of the ceiling up.
Oh, man.
Oh, here we got just a couple comments here. Azazel's number is 115. Good point. He also says it's not satanic, it's retarded. Fair point. We can
call Satan a retard. That's fine.
I think if YouTube strikes us for that, then that really says something about society. We got Kevin here. Thomas treats the spine like how Deleuze treats rhizomes. I think that's a very fair point. Also,
Oh
just
boy, wait until you find out what the next book we're reading.
you guys are gonna have a bad time. I'm excited about it, though.
Oh, same.
Willie McDuff here, just calling back. Schopenhauer could only communicate with his maid through written notes, so literally me.
Congrats on being able to afford a maid in the year of our Lord 2024.
You know what? Back in the day, it seemed like everyone could have a maid, which meant that they must have been available for like slave wages. Jorge Bataille, that's a new one. No, because sometimes Georges is Jorge. Look, I'm not going to defend how Hispanics say things on this show. I'm just going to call it what it is. So that was the note that I had for that segment. Actually, no, wait, I'm on. I didn't get to my note yet. It's 2:06.
No, we didn't. I interrupted you for a time crystal joke.
No, like this is the only book where we'll be able to do that shit. You know how rarely I can talk about crystals any other time.
Fair.
So just let me see if I can find it because I have a note. I want to make sure it's on the page. Anyway, I was going to read here. It says, it is the base plan of German idealism and nature philosophy to theorize a grand voyage from unconsciousness unto consciousness. The beneficiary of this, its protagonist, is invariably the cast as the self. From the conclusion of the journey, personality is revealed as both end and engine, meaning the drive and destination, the parent and child, of the entire long drawn-out process. These are the satisfactions of self-consciousness, to look back recollectively and know that it has made itself. However, Fitch himself had implied that the protagonist of this logical machinery, of this idealist drama, could be switched out and replaced. Since he acknowledged that the founding principle and actor of one's own philosophy cannot be anything apart from personal inclination, selecting selfhood as the endpoint of the entire process could be seen as arbitrary. Schellingian natural philosophy, indeed, had arguably already switched out personality out, replacing it with vitality, more broadly construed. Yet, what would a natural philosophy look like? And this is where we get to Moynihan stuff. What would it look like if we'd switched self-reflection out for pain perception as the motor of its colossal telic machinery, and in so doing, therefore acknowledge that the human cerebrospinal system is just the climactic avenue for cosmic trauma to become self-aware of its meandering sufferings? So there we get to an interesting idea that, the universe is becoming aware of itself through us, which is an idea that we didn't really see established that much earlier in the book. This is where it starts to kind of get into what others might call the mind of God understanding himself. But he can't use that terminology. He can only say this is the universe understanding itself through inflicting pain on itself. So in that sense, we're just more of a mechanism. And it's at this point, we remove everything like he's saying remove personality entirely. There is no personality. There is no such thing as self-reflection. There's only trauma manifested in the physical realm, aware of its own trauma, trying to escape itself. So that's why, to me, this is where it gets really dehumanizing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, and this is where you see, I think, a lot of what gets called the decadent romantics come out of this as well, but also that if we're only aware of our ability to suffer, then clearly the end point of existence should be, logically speaking, to end suffering. And that has a lot of different variations if you're interested in how you want to end suffering. For instance, Cudahy would say that like the Jewish idea of ending suffering would be to immanentize its messianic age, which would be, Marxism, socialism, communism, and those kind of revolutions. And then at the same time, you have others that are like, well, we need to clearly revert. We must return to monkey. We must return to something, or just go out and become extinct. And others are like, well, no, we must advance. We must accelerate. That way we're not in charge. And, you could allow yourself to live in some sort of cybernetic hell wherein it's like, I have no mouth, but I must scream, but I'm not in charge anymore. Ergo, I'm free of suffering. But at the same time, right, it totally debases itself and divorces itself from any semblance of to suffer well. And if you get to the bottom of this page right here, there's an interesting gentleman who gets cited. So there you go. Strangely enough, natural philosophy and Schilliganism proved influential in Russia during the first half of the 19th century. Though the organ of Moscow's Academy of Sciences, Schelling was perhaps more popular there than in his native Germany. But of course, in this utterly different setting, Schelling's thought inevitably underwent some interesting mutations. It was the eccentric Prince Vladimir Oldovsky, who died in 1869, in 1844, penned a short vignette which can only be described as the oldest system program of cosmotraumatics. He fleshes out the suggestion of a natural philosophy that sees the weaving together of a nervous system as the function of a cosmic suffering rather than a universal spirit. So we divorced ourselves from any semblance of the divine. We will take away even sort of like the cosmogenesis point that would later be adopted and developed by Chardin and others. But instead, he has this short story in this collection that has been translated called Russian Nights. It came out in 1844. And, well, Mr. Grant, only one of us here is a Canadian, so don't worry.
Just call attention to that comment. You gentlemen are far too charitable and patient with those pseudo-intellectual works of academic fraud. Must be a Canadian thing. Well, I mean, yeah, maybe, you know what? Maybe we're just very patient and inquisitive up here.
Maybe we just find these frauds entertaining.
Well, like I said, my co-host Judas on Blood Satellite has no patience for any of this.
No, he doesn't.
And one thing that we were talking about on the last live stream that this is something I was saying, because we have covered a great many fringe thinkers, especially from the conspiracy realm. I gave the example of David Icke. And David Icke, I think, is comparable to someone who created this vast ecosystem of ideas over his long and storied career. He publishes a book like every 2 fucking years. And he's got this whole internal lore of, I mean, everyone's kind of heard references to it of that's where they get the lizard aliens cloaked as like the Clintons, and the moon is hollow and everything's a simulation. And it's like conspiracy upon conspiracy. It's everything kind of tied together. And then at some point you say, okay, let's say all that's true. Let's really dive into the internal logic of this thing. We don't need to stand outside of it and say it's dumb. Let's get into it, right? But ask, okay, where's this headed? Let's say it's all true. Let's say every politician on Earth is a lizard alien. Where's the resistance? I assume David Icke is leading the resistance because he's also in contact with these other aliens. It's like the X-Files, if anyone's watched that show. There's like the plot line of it's actually dueling alien civilizations over Earth. It's that, right? So he was contacted by a messianic figure and given all this information, right? So I'm like, okay, you must be leading the charge against these baby-eating lizards. And his solution is just to choose love. And you think, okay, wait a minute. Like let's say I've read everything you've ever read. I've read some of his stuff. I'm like, it's all true. All you've got to solve this is some hippie new age bullshit that discounts everything else. So when you look at vast constructs like this, I try and just skip ahead to the end point. It's like, okay, but what now? What at the end? What are you supposed to do with all this information? It's like, oh, well, you're supposed to destroy the universe because there's no such thing as you're just trauma and you should re-traumatize the universe until it dies. I'm like, well, that's no, I reject that. So, but you can still enjoy it. You could find stuff in there, but I fundamentally reject the conclusion of this thing. And I think that's important to establish. Would you agree with that or no?
I would agree with that. I think sometimes that when people have an outsized influence, or I mean, Moynihan is still writing books and doing things. I can't really say that he's completely off the walls or whatever. But at the same time, I think that it becomes important to understand that these people have been around for years. I mean, we mentioned in the first episode that the person who wrote the preface for this worked with the CCRU. There are chapter names in this book that are straight out references and homages to Nick Land and his writings and his work. But also at the same time, it's I think with these writings especially that they're I read this, or when I was reading it, and also when I first heard about it, I thought this was really cool, and that was more or less my reason why I wanted to do it. I said it was interesting, and I wanted to cover it, and I thought no better of a person that I've covered books with before. If you don't know, Dimes and I have spent over 6 hours on, and you can find that on my Odyssey and Rumble channels, where we covered the book "What Went Wrong: The Creation and the Collapse of the Black Jewish Alliance." So there you go if you're interested.
It's one of my favorite things we ever did. Like, that is such a good. I recommend that to anyone I can.
I might bring it to YouTube. I probably will. But it's funny that you mentioned all that like David Icke lore, because I just think of myself, oh, that's like the Apocryphon of James. I'm like, oh, this is just like this nice feel good, like there's a heavenly battle going on, but with this like secret knowledge, you can choose love and win. But it's
I would
I just hate making references to Gnosticism because it feels so overdone.
Yeah, and also like I would respect L. Ron Hubbard more than David Icke because he created his own fucking thing and he got a ship out of it. He got a ship full of whores. And I don't see David Icke's ship full of whores. So one of these two guys pulled something real off.
And one of those guys infiltrated the feds. The others didn't. So there you go.
Yeah. But sorry, I'm bringing this a bit too much down to my level. There's might be serious people watching this.
Well, they can have some entertainment as a treat. If not, they can get into the spine crystals. It's fine.
And let me just establish that I do like this stuff. I love reading this stuff. And like I said, some people discount it entirely. I think there's actually a lot of stuff that's usable here. And I think even though I might disagree with the conclusion, I do see this as a part of a sort of corpus in development emerging out of Western thought that's very messy. It's very sketchy, but it's touching upon ideas that I think are and I might have even said this at the beginning of all this, but it's at least the first indication of a truly 21st century post-ideological way of thinking. And there's parts of it I don't like, and there's parts of it I think might even be destructive if taken too seriously. But I think Nick Land, he made a funny tweet recently. He was making fun of someone trying to summarize the CCRU by saying it was like an experimental place for new thought, which is like a very, corporate marketing way of saying what it was. So I wouldn't explain it as that. It's like it's a bunch of guys coming up with new ideas. It sounds like hippie shit again. But I do think they're investigating certain things that I don't think have been really investigated before. And just the idea of playing with history as if it was just another paint on the canvas and merging that with just occult nonsense. I'm like, you know what? I like the energy here. And this is what I said to you before when people ask, why are we, magnetized towards something like this? I'm like, I just think I'm picking up on a vibe. I think you're picking up on a vibe. And that even though we can logically pick this apart in certain areas, I like the rhythm of this. Something's here. I don't know how else to explain it. But and I think that's just where I'm at with it. What do you think about that?
For me especially, I think that there's something about this school or just this collection of thinkers or writers or schizoposters or whatever, where it's essentially they're trying to come up with this history, this alternative understanding of history, and that's about it. And for me, yes, they're within Mystery Grove spine, a tiny little Asian woman from San Francisco whose spine you have to deal with. Not only is it a gold mine for fiction, but to me, what I found interesting was that, even if you disagree with, and there's a lot of stuff in this text I really disagree with, just from an ontological standpoint alone. But what I find so interesting about is that these writers and these thinkers and what he's building off of is an attempt to offer new hermeneutical tools for politics and understanding the world where conventional means may not work or apply. So for me, I think about using catastrophism, and especially for the history of ideology. It's particularly interesting for me, because it's like, well, we can take a look at various online groups or movements or ideas and trace these catastrophic contacts with reality to then illustrate, here are the traumatic events that have allowed certain movements to think the way that they do. Why is there a knee-jerk response, for instance, to saying, there's feds or there's a trap? Not because there are feds and there are people out there, but also because there is the political trauma built into large sections of the online right that are encompassed in two traumatic events about online or like public gatherings: Charlottesville in 2017 and January 6th in 2021. Like, do you not think that those traumatic events would not like change the way an ideology or a group of communities online think? Like, to me, there's like, I can apply this sort of catastrophism model to politics, even if it's not all that great. Like, there's hyperstition involved, yeah, but hey, there's some truth to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about this shit.
Yeah, hyperstition is my favorite, maybe the deepest concept that they play around with. I think that's why it gets brought up. It's like even people who don't like Baudrillard understand hyper reality, and hyper reality, it keeps getting brought up and passed between us, and sometimes people don't even know who originally coined the phrase, but there's something true about it. And hyperstition, this even brings us back to a previous video we did, another great one on McLuhan. And I'm going to just tease out a couple ideas here that I've been working on for a Vanguard's Journal article. So these are going to sound kind of rough, but it has to do with the idea of the noosphere, NOO sphere, which is, I might have explained this before in a previous episode, but, there's these different strata to the planet. There's, the Earth with all of its, the plants and stuff. Then there's the biosphere on top of it, which is all of the animal life and everything. And then there's the noosphere, which is sort of the encapsulating data around the planet, and sometimes in the form of satellites, but also in the forms of transmissions that are crisscrossing the Earth. So it's almost like a force field of information. But that is a self-defined strata, and what's interesting about it is you can spatialize it and you can visualize it. I think even Andre Murr, when he was doing Emancipation of the Author, talking about, once you conceptualize data as a realm, and in a McLuhan sense, something that extends our senses, we extend into this actual new dimension, because people kind of intuit that the digital realm is real. It's not the real world. You can't get shot there. But you understand, especially now, that the digital realm is some place you have relationships with, real relationships with. Information is real. Things happen in the digital space that have effects on the real world. So it's interfacing with us in a different way, and we can project ourselves into it in a different way. But there's this idea that once you do that, you could actually, and I mean this literally, visually, track trends in data and track, the identity groups of people. So you're almost witnessing these organisms that are composed of cells, and the cells are people in a sense. But what that means is that you have this entire separate aspect of humanity that floats above it, that we can literally interface with, and can interface with us, because we do things on the online world that have visceral, immediate, sometimes fatal consequences in the real world. So it's not even less real in that sense. So when I look at the CCRU stuff, or any of the stuff, hyperstition, about what hyperstition is, it's like a fiction that almost becomes an organism that realizes itself in the real world. Or it's like a spell. Another way to look at this would be you're talking something into reality, or you're creating through your words, like a tulpa that becomes real again. And that sounds all silly and crazy and made up, but you can break this down in terms of just data analytics. And you're like, well, that kind of is literally true if you think about it like that. I know that was a lot of information to go at once. I have not looked at the comments to see what people think about that. So you tell me what you think.
Well, I like you said, I think that there's a lot that you can look at this and appreciate, whether you want to look at it from like an unfiction perspective or at the same time. I mean, even with like the noosphere, I think that people know that ideas, for people want to meme on the movie Inception, even though it's like 14 years old at this point.
Oh
It's old
shit!
enough.
No way.
Yeah, it's old enough to be groomed by one of Ethan Ralph's pay piggies. It's insane. But at the same time, like, it's an important thing to consider that, like, ideas can come from all over, and they can be planted. For as much as we talk about psyops and such, that there are ideas that have been planted or come from think tanks, or there are certain philosophers that get way too much attention, despite the fact that they are sort of like the dominating ideology of certain groups or ideas. Cough, cough, Straussianism. But it's important to realize that these things are important to understand. At least that I think it's something to be what's the word I'm looking for? Knowing is half the battle. GI Joe. But you need to realize that in a digital space, you're going to come in contact with ideas and with people and with groups that may not necessarily prepare you for what is to come or what's to do. I was sent a meme by one of our friends here. I'll take a look at that in just a second. But I think that you just need to know some of these things here. The woke spinal catastrophist right is in league with the WEF. They want us to all use our spines to destroy classical liberalism. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's whatever makes James Lindsay crazy. But I want to get back onto this here real quick. The vignette.
I just want to say, the more Lindsay posting, the better. I'd love to see more of that in the chat. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So no, this short, few pages long, and the story entitled "The Last Suicide." Odovsky refers to the piece in prefatory notes as a truly monstrous creation. That it most certainly is. It depicts a far future humanity that has reformatted the entire surface of the planet, erasing the biosphere with the technosphere. And I'm going to just share my screen now so people can read it.
Absolutely.
Because it's a short story, and there's some interesting little tidbits to it here. So
let me know if I need to stop sharing my screen. Okay, hold on. Here we go.
See. And if let me go zoom in real quick. Hold on. There we go. So, even if you can't see it real well, I'll read it. The time has come, as predicted by the philosophers of the 19th century. The human race multiplied, the proportionality between the works of nature and the needs of humanity. Slowly but steadily it approached this disaster. Driven by poverty, the city dwellers fled to the fields turned into villages, villages into cities, and the cities imperceptibly expanded their borders. In vain did man use all the knowledge acquired through the sweat of centuries. In vain did he add to the artifices of art that powerful activity which is generated by fatal necessity. The Arabian sands have long been the Arabian sands have long been. The steppes have turned into fertile pastures. The ice of the north have been covered with fat lands. The incredible efforts of chemistry, artificial heat revived the kingdom. Eternal cold, but all in vain. Centuries passed. The animal life displaced the plant. The city boundaries merged, and the entire globe from pole to pole turned into one large populated city, to which all luxury, all diseases, all refinement, all debauchery, all activity of the former cities, but terrible poverty hung over the luxurious city, and the universe of improved methods of communication carried only news about it to all the corners of the globe. The terrible phenomenon of hunger and disease, buildings still rose, fields still with several tiers, illuminated by the artificial sun, irrigated artificially with water. They brought a bountiful harvest, but disappeared before they had time to collect it. At every step, in canals, rivers, in the air, everywhere they crowded people. Everything was seething with life, but life was killing itself. In vain, people prayed. Each other had means to resist the common disaster. The old people remembered about what had happened. They blamed everything on luxury and moral depravity. Young men called upon the power of the mind, will, and imagination to help. The wisest sought means to continue to exist without food, and no one laughed at them. And here, and again, it gets that fatalism lower on. It says, but hope was not long aroused. In vain did contagious diseases fly from end to end and killed the inhabitants by the thousands. The sons of Adam, smitten by the fatal words of Scripture, they grew and they multiplied. And later on, in the rest of the story, it talks about a man who tries to stop someone from ending their own life. And as he's hated by the crowd, why would you stop him from doing what is only natural, because there is no hope? He says, what are you people talking about? I want him to live. It's only right, and I must take care of myself. Let me go. I have to take care of my children. And the crowd goes wild and insane. This man is not like us. He has children. How could he bring them into this world? And you notice that he's going to cite this guy, but also at the same time, Why is he doing it? Well, because this is the sort of people that he finds to be the natural inhabitants of escaping trauma, to escape pain. That the ultimate end is anti-natalism and to bring about the end of ourself. If it means that all of creation groaneth and travaileth, as Paul writes, then all of a sudden all that we must do is to just immanentize the eschaton by just ending ourselves. And if humanity is gone, then at last we shall all return to dust, as dust thou art. And for, Moynihan and all these people that he's citing, that seems to be the conclusion, which I think is just retarded. But nevertheless, and this is why I think for the first 2 parts of this book, it's so interesting. And then it's like getting punched in the nuts right before a wonderful knowledge. And it's just like, well, great, it's ruined, like instead of life, we're going to just, castrate the geldings and bid them to be fruitful. It's like, oh, well, this is, I'm not a fan of this last section of the book.
So I'm just sharing my screen here again. Yeah, and I remember many months, maybe years ago, we discussed a work by Thomas Moynihan titled "The Conspiracy Against the Human Race," because I wanted, and I bring this up because it reminds me of that book. I wanted to hear defense of nihilism, like what true nihilism, because oftentimes nihilism is used as a pejorative. Everyone accuses each other of being nihilistic, but I rarely saw anyone come out on the side of nihilism and make a positive, ironically, positive case for it. And this book does that. It's called, again, Conspiracy Against the Human Race. I don't think it's particularly well written because I don't think there's a strong argument there. But he's a horror author and he's written many great, pretty popular guy. But he was saying much of the same thing, that you're rebelling against life. You're choosing anti-life, and it's funny. Because you don't want to have kids, because why would you subject life to this? You are forced to subject to it, so you can never react to life in the affirmative, which includes suicide. And that's the irony, because what he would be told, people would tell everyone, "Oh, you're so nihilistic. Why don't you just fucking kill yourself?" He had said that would be saying yes to something. That would be like, I'm saying affirmative to ending my own life, and I refuse to do that. I refuse to do anything affirmative in life. I am rebelling against life by just going with the flow. And this is kind of like an accelerationist point of view. Like, I'm going to hope the universe ends, but I will not participate in ending it. And I don't think I'm being uncharitable of that description, but I sense,
I like the comments here. Contemplate this on the spine of woe. That's it's very good. I love a good reference. Sorry.
But here's a good reference. James Flimsy.
James Flimsy. Oh, so true.
Nice.
So true.
Sorry, I cut you off there.
No. I again, like whenever there's something in bold or in italics here, I find these are particularly interesting things here. Like you mentioned the noosphere, right? And he's building off of Odovsky's work here. The plague as news. Because all of a sudden we are left with just the timeline, the digital ecosystem in which news and certain memes come out and about into existence. When we tell people, instead of KYS, it's seek Canadian healthcare and things like that. And I what I find particularly interesting here, of course, is that we talk about things as this is what Adam Lanza believed. If you want an example of where this leads, well, we don't endorse that here. So
it's a good example. Like, again, what is the end point of all of this? Like, really, you would, and it sounded like Ligotti would even try, and he was trying to veer people away from doing what the reaction would be, which is, if life is truly meaningless, if you believe that, why not end it all now, or try and end it for as many people as possible? So he had to be like, no, that's just what life wants. You don't want to help life by ending it, do you? But to anyone else reading that, they would say, "Oh yeah, I subscribe to what you're saying. I should be embodied trauma. That's what you want, right?" Anyway, but it's only like weirdos like us who would read this. Imagine the wrong person reading this.
Yeah, a friend of mine in one of my Telegram chats had said, "I like the fact that the people who are reading this work are the people that these writers hate."
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, it's so true. Willie McDuff writes in the comments, he says, paraphrasing, but I like what Prude said in the previous stream. I can see why you would believe in this if you didn't believe in God.
Yeah, no, I because especially if you're searching for something like a very big idea to try and explain, as we were confronted with more information about how the universe works, you are trying to fill some kind of hole that God and logos and some of these other concepts really do fill comfortably if you dare to look into them. But if you don't do that, then you start filling it with like weird occult sci-fi stuff, kind of saying a lot of the same things, but it is inverted. There is no creation. The
Well,
height of
no,
creation is destruction.
yeah, no, exactly. And this is why we were talking about in the second episode about this book. No, it was the very first episode where we mentioned, or we discussed how a lot of this is brought on discarnately. There is sort of this, mind-body dualism, but it's broken down that there is a brain-spine dualism. That our lower modes are thought are actually like this spinal animal that is trying to get out and past the human evolved brain that overlaps on its folds. Because you notice that what gets embraced in here compared to, say, classical Western philosophy or even the Christianized understanding, as Saint Athanasius writes in the Incarnation, that what Athanasius and others would be attempting to do would be to understand and provide logic to us, to make sure that things are not alogos, that they're not illogical. Whereas Moynihan and a lot of the people that he's embracing are actually diving into the alogosi, or the illogical, in order to provide a counterfactual or a counter understanding to the world, that rather than the suffering that is brought upon by existence, and that great is your reward in heaven, instead, that in order to twist that meaning, we must understand that suffering is there, and that to end it means to end ourselves, and that's it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, that there is no good suffering, that everything is suffering, but there's no
They
way
would
out
say
of
that the
that.
concept of good suffering is cope.
Yeah, and also like this idea that, we on our side of the fence politically might say that we are superior to animals. We have dominion over animals, and that is responsibility to animals and nature. That's how most of the people I know look at it. But I find that from this perspective, and I would hesitate to call him on the left because I don't know for sure, but a lot of post-left people like this stuff. He's saying that, oh no, you're less than an animal, that you are. And this is why I mentioned Thomas Ligotti, because a lot of the nihilists, when you speak to them, they will say essentially the same thing, which is you are cursed to intelligence. It would be better if you did not have intelligence. And insofar as you do have intelligence, you should try and end it as fast as possible to rid the universe of this curse of intelligence. And that is just the complete inverse of how I think we over here in this very sketched out political milieu understand intelligence, as maybe as even though it does cause suffering, that is something to be perhaps utilized rather than be consumed by and then become the primary agent of. If you're looking for a fucking 40K reference, this would be like becoming the chaos. I don't know
Yeah.
much about 40K, but yeah, that seems right.
It's wild that you mentioned Ligotti. He's not cited once in this entire book.
Yeah, it's just a thing that I remember reading, but I don't know, like I think enough people kind of know about it that I see parallels here, but I don't think anyone wants, they would never want to say, oh, this is a nihilistic outlook, this is something else. But to me, it's hand in glove, or at least that's the vibe of this.
Yeah, this is your caliber of philosophers these days, by the way. But I like this. News is plague, or plague is news, and then all of a sudden, the woke mind virus is struck again, and it's like, well, actually, there's some truth to that. Because what are mimetics other than a form of psychic viruses?
Well, and that's what's so interesting. I mentioned before about how a lot of this is just spells. And you would hear conspiracy circles talk about spells, words or spells, and some people might dismiss that. But it's like, I mean, from a hyperstitional perspective, that is true. You can speak things into reality, and those can be accelerated and promulgated through technology. So this idea that our understanding of mimetics has evolved with the technology, which has, in my mind, evolved mimetics itself.
For
into
he
these.
spake and they came into being. Like there's we have a similar power. Unfortunately, it's not for creation. It's shit posts.
Also, Tree Surgeon here. I too get my philosophy from True Detective. Also from Hazel here, the difference between people like Da Vinci and Moynihan is that Da Vinci knew how the human body worked. Sometimes I didn't mean to just throw a bunch of digs at Moynihan here. I don't finish reading the comments as I post them. I do like that comment though.
It is a good one.
Oh yeah, and I think you mentioned this. Jay Ford, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh, from Ecclesiastes 4:5. So I had another section here from 209. And where?
Yeah, go for it.
Here is this the? Yeah, here it is. So I thought this part was interesting. It says, considering the whole of terrestrial history can be seen as a slow motion exothermic explosion, speeding energy dispersal up to a fever pitch in the form of techno-industrial civilization. This is where you start to see a lot of the anti-capitalist stuff woven in here. That sits at the base of a lot of this, especially with not even the CCRU kind of, but Nick Land especially. It is suitable that it climaxes in such pyrotechnics. Nociceptive spines are raised tendentiously from the planet only in order to vengefully catapult back down upon it with planet-cracking technical force. The cervical zenith, the upward surge of the orthograde solar animal, is a ticking time bomb. For just as the plant coheres with the sun through its blossom, the brain of the human animal coheres with the sun in its invention of the fission bomb. Perhaps Oken was correct then to propose that the technical art of war is the pinnacle of the world process. As Ballard much later ventured...
Oh boy, there's that Ballard again.
Yeah, as Ballard much later ventured, World War III, where bodies, sand, and weaponry become fused in the white-hot rippling heat of the blast, represents the final self-destruction and imbalance of an asymmetric world, the last suicidal spasm of the dextratory helix DNA. So there you get sort of like the goal of humanity is to like take revenge on the planet itself. Of course, we would rise up from the planet and then drop bombs on it, basically. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, so the premise essentially being that, listen, if the only way to really bring about the true end of it all and to rebel against a world that has created us and to birth us, then in some way we destroy the cosmic mother, which we destroy Gaia. We will kill ourselves and our mother.
Exactly.
And also like the nociceptive spines, just all of that means is that my ability to perceive harmful stimuli. So everything about my existence is existence is pain. It's the I'm not going to make that reference, but it's. Yeah, that's what it's there for. Essentially, is that I'm there. But one of the things I did have notes for, and just scroll real quick, is he mentions this guy right here, Saltus, and had no idea who he was. As with every philosopher that gets mentioned in here, I go out of my way to look them up because we talked about Barker in the first one, and Barker's not real. But so, for instance, Edgar Edverston Saltus, who died in 1921, he was an American writer known for his prose, and he was paralleled by other decadent authors such as Oscar Wilde, Joris Kohl, Huysmans, and Gabriel D'Annunzio, and sort of that decadent movement, artificiality, excess. But for instance, he's part of the Theosophical Society, and though he was a well-known anti-theist as well, but he credited Ralph Waldo Emerson for his beginning to believe that maybe there is something out there, but he focused on esotericism and other sorts of things, and then he had a whole bunch of wives and other things, but like a strange guy, had no idea. But he also spent quite a bit of his time translating a lot of these works written by Balzac and a bunch of other French guys. And he had a whole bunch of other pseudonyms. I mean, this guy was a prolific writer, and I'm just glad that he exists, and now I can find out more about him in that respect. And he wrote quite a bit of fiction. including the pace that kills, and with respects to fiction. But he also wrote about history as well, particularly when it comes to his own idea of philosophy. So his writings have been put together into this work known as the Philosophical Writings of Edgar Saltus, The Philosophy of Disenchantment and the Anatomy of Negation. And this is partially what Moynihan is building off of when citing him, this like great quietist, that we must negate existence. We must negate the ability to perceive ourselves in the traditional norms, and that, suffering is not necessarily great, but instead self-extermination is the yes. I'm being a bit of an asshole about the how I pronounce that. I'm being a bit of a jerk, but essentially voluntary self-extinction. I'm allowed to have fun.
Balls. People can't pick up on like subtext in this. It's being cursed with an autistic audience is like, you said it wrong. Did you mean to say ball sack? It's like, okay, let's pull the emergency brake on the fun we're having.
Do I need to get the weighted blankets out, chat? Do I need to get the weighted blankets?
It's funny.
Fidget spinner.
My son, he was very young. He had a very difficult time falling asleep. Sometimes as infants do it around like 6 months, maybe even less. And one thing that they were recommending, if they have a hard time, if they're just starting to like sleep alone, you give them a weighted sleep sack to help them kind of, feel like they're being held in the embrace of their mother. And it's just, I had alarm bells going off in my head. I'm like, no, it can't be weighted. No, I'm cursing him with autism this early. He's got to have a chance.
We talk about wards and sigils, but then all of a sudden, like with this weighted blanket, I smite thee with autism.
Derek Dead says, I prefer one of those cow squeezing things that Temple Grayson use. I don't know what that means. I hope that's not some kind of sex thing.
I don't know.
They'll say, why do they like the weighted blanket so much? Here's the thing no one wants to talk about, is that I think just weighted blankets feel good. And every time if you're just on the couch and you have a weighted blanket and you're watching something like, I don't know, HBO's
you just
The
mean
Penguin.
The horse lady, like the autism advocate, like the person with cows. Yeah, that Temple Grandin.
Thank you for interrupting me giving a full-throated endorsement of weighted blankets. I was about to go off and like, no, they're actually really good, and you know what, they're actually calming. Like if you're feeling riled up.
Actually, I like weighted blankets. I'm for the cozy maxing. It has nothing else to do with my own potential autism and social awkwardness.
We're talking about snug maxing. We're talking about being cozy pilled.
Yeah,
it's getting into the season for it too, because do you want to have one weighted blanket, or do you want to have a mountain of quilts, or both? How cozy do you intend to be this season? Also, if you buy your son a Thomas the Tank Engine toy, already failed that test. He's got one. There's something about it. Something about that fucking train, man.
It's like when all those like I guess Mother Jones writers are like, Paw Patrol is secretly fascist, and it's like the world where the trains run on time of Thomas the Tank Engine, and it's just like, well, man, if like the most basic childhood ideas of like there's good guys and bad. Actually, I don't care. I like the progress we're making, where every normal social expectation of human civilization is fascism in the eyes of the left. I think if you wanted to be an accelerationist about it, this would be a fun ride to stay on.
Yeah, I don't like interrupting my opponents as they're making a mistake, but I recently saw a video taken from something like the World Socialist Congress, and it's that same dais of freaks that you're probably used to. It's like, oh, we got like the really tall skinny woman who's got an upside down face, and we got like the hunchback older guy who was like the only last living communist, and then there was one figure who's like a black disabled man who can only scream, and they just wheel him up to the mic to give some speech in German. And then some people were making fun of that, like, "Oh, look at this is the
Oh
communist
yeah,
back
yeah.
in."
Martin was making fun of him, saying like, "I don't think a crippled black communist is anyone we should be listening to."
Yeah,
And like, I think one of them replied saying like, "Oh, well, ableism is the first sign of fascism."
yeah. And the response to that I made, others have made, is like, I mean, thank you for letting people know that if they don't find this awesome, they're a fascist. Because people instinctually look at this and say, "Oh, like, that's funny. It's funny. It's weird. It's regular people don't know what to make of this." And so, but if you're telling regular people that they're fascist for thinking that's kind of funny, well, hey, you know what? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is funny. It is funny just to see a guy in a wheelchair who could only scream at you. I'm sure he's fine. It's not like he's mentally disabled. He seems like just a competent guy.
He just
Who
seems really excited, and I'm sure he's got a lot of comments on his spine.
That's probably the only tolerable way to listen to anyone talk about Hegel, as far as I'm concerned.
That's true. It's way better than some e-girl trying to tell you about Hegel.
Yeah. See, we went all the way around the world with this one. Now I love this fucking guy. I want to give him a podcast. Fuck the Hegelian e-girls. Get this guy a mic.
So, continuing on, it says a theory of spinal catastrophism demands an ethic of soteriological therapizing as that fucking Barker. So, okay, if you're brand new here, Barker does not exist. He's not real. Okay, he was a teacher at Miskatonic Virtual University in the 90s. He's not real. He's not real.
Also, the idea that they say he does exist and never will exist, which makes one suspicious that, oh, does he exist? And that you're just being weird about it. But no, he doesn't exist. He's kind of an example of what we're talking about. It's like enough people are kind of willing this tulpa into existence, like in The Empty Man. And so, hey, maybe one day there's going to be a guy who just has this name and spent some time in academia, and there's going to be a bunch of the worst women you've ever imagined looking to fuck him. He's not going to know why he's getting all this like alt pussy, but he's just going to hear like, "I didn't think you were real," and he's not going to know what that means, but he's not going to question it.
Yeah. So, source, I made it the fuck up. So true. So true. Turns out the Japanese parody of American politics is more real than you think. But so anyways, he continues, as Barker well knew, priest and suicide, our solemn task is thus to become the universe's way of killing itself. For we cannot just destroy ourselves, but it is our duty to destroy everything. Destroy everything that exists. There you go. He said it. He said it. He said it. We're so excited.
He did the bit.
He did the bit. Wow, he's literally me. But, you know, it's our duty to destroy everything. This Hartman expatiates is the apotheosis of all cosmic striving, from the primitive cell to the origin of man, and the pinnacle is utmost world progress. The tame Schopenhauer is then criticized and duly surpassed, for he conceived the problem only in an individual sense, thus obviating its categorical force. We must apprehend it universally, Hartman argues. Indeed, he pictures to himself the Schopenhauerian scenario of mankind dying out gradually by sexual continence, finds it entirely lacking. So that sort of Malthusian sense of overpopulation or whatever. Concluding that it would only merely perpetuate the misery of existence. What would it avail if all mankind should die out gradually, he asked. No, this would not do. The world process or the unconscious would just spit out another humanoid species, another upright ape, to recommence the procession of pain all over again. No, humanity must become the mouthpiece of the manifestation of the absolute negation within history, thus ending history from within, coinciding with the temporal end of the world process, the last day.
Yeah, and just that phrase, I don't think it's come up before in the book, but this is what I always direct people to: infinite negation. And so for people who thought we were just reading between the lines or making up what we were saying before, no, like it's pretty explicit that this is the end point of all this, that, you know, it's not even good enough just to fade out of existence. You must you must accelerate the destruction. And it's not accelerate destruction in the event of sort of a bounce back after the Baalneck rebirth into something superior, and maybe even in a Nietzschean sense. You know, we separate the wheat from the chaff, and then we're ushered into a vitalist utopia. It's like, no, we've abandoned vitalism. There is no reapprehending vitalism. We're past that. So we could only die as fast as possible. And that's our duty, basically, what he's saying.
Yeah, and again, this is why I find the first 2/3 of this book so damn interesting, and then this is just oh, like, you know, what a awful blue-balled experience. So, you know, we must become ground zero for infinite negation's entrance into the finite time. Christological connotations are unavoidable, like Odoevsky's Last Messiah or Schopenhauer's Priest and Sacrifice. We almost become what Jean-Paul Richter contemporaneously called the coming dead Christ. Our extinction, therefore, cannot be privative. It must be superlative. We cannot go gently into the cosmic night. We must go out with a bang long enough or big enough to somehow become self-propagating. It is our solemn duty to enact a negation so superlative it cannibalizes existence from within. It is strictly our analgesic duty not to remove not only to remove our own ability to perceive pain, but to remove any potential future nervous systems anywhere.
He has a line here which is interesting, which is, we cannot go gently to the cosmic night. We must go out with a bang enough to somehow become self-propagating. So it's almost like we must become like a form of destruction that propagates itself. Like it must be a destruction without end. That's a different way of saying it. It's like we don't want to be, you know, the inverse of the Big Bang.
We must create an explosion similar to the fears that we would ignite the Earth's atmosphere and destroy all life as we know it. And this is what they're saying. The end, instead of getting a back scratcher or a fucking bit of Bengay on your back after a long day at work or taking a Tylenol, it is no. I need you to just kill yourself.
Well, it's even worse than that, if you really take this part seriously. And I do think he believes this. I don't think he's doing the dodge he does sometimes in the book where he's like, I'm going to quote these other people and just put it there and say, oh, that's interesting. I think he is proposing that you need to create something approximating hell. We need to take an active role in creating hell in the universe. Because, like I said, we must create an end point, a conflagration that is self-perpetuating, meaning not only do you end your existence, you create an environment where no existence could conceivably ever occur again for all eternity. You're creating the chaos realm, is what he's saying, because we owe it. Like, we need to become anti-life. It's not only to end life, we must become a form of anti-life, which I've never heard. Like, to me, it's like, I don't know if that negates everything that precedes. Someone had a good comment here, which was, if I can find it here, it's like, I like you had said, you like the first two parts of this book, then it leads to this. And someone was like, yeah, I don't know how we got to this. Where's the fucking comment here? Is this like, I don't know how we got to this from all the spinal trauma stuff, but like it sounds, and once you know that's the end point, I'm like, you know, is this person your enemy? You know, I'm going to read his other book.
I mean, that's what begs the question is that if you think that if these philosophers and if these self-destructive forces that are not just to eliminate humanity, but no, to eliminate the possibility that anything else could ever develop the cognizance or consciousness, or, you know, to be quote unquote ensouled with something, we must prevent that from happening, period. So it's not even just cannibalizing humanity, it is cannibalizing all of creation to ensure that the earth is a dead and barren rock, that there is not one single germ left. And he's my enemy just because he wasted my time. So true, Jay Ford. This guy wasted my time.
Also, there's a part here from Major, which is interesting. He says, most likely this is a masculine war impulse being constrained by an academic bugman life. That's an interesting way of looking at it. I do see this more as like, you know, if you look at
destroy everything that exists is a pretty like based, like rug-brained knee-jerk reaction to the world.
Because like, in one sense, you look at the Nietzschean drive for, you know, war, right? Or the war as a eugenic engine, that, yes, the warrior seeks out war in a way to kind of self-select for this aristocratic upper class, this warrior class, or so is the ideal. But this model would reject all of that sort of eugenic aristocratic drive. It would reject, like I said, it doesn't have any interest in vitalism itself, because that's what you would say, like, oh, the war drive is itself a vitalism drive. He's like, no, this is something, like you said, more academic bugmanish, but there's no quest for vitalism even inside of it, which is interesting.
Yeah, and at the same time, this is the there was a section earlier where it said, I think it was like the fanatic priest, Thanatos, like death, like just these death priests. Again, it's who had it? Was it Bennett's Phylactery that said, we're all living in 40K and we're just picking our factions? Like this is what I'm reminded of.
I just want to say we've got Penultimo. Imagine being this butt mad. I hope he's not talking about me. I am not butt mad.
I think he's talking about our philosophers here.
My butt is chill, cool as a cucumber, brother. So we had a lot of people joining up and giving some interesting comments here. This is a very strange one to jump in at the end of, by the way. Like if you're,
we're actually at the end of the section minus the postscript, but again, it's incredibly disappointing to say that really the logical conclusion, and I can't even call it logical because I just imply that this is operating, alogos, just to be illogical, to essentially now where it's like, oh, well, the way to go is just to be like the Necrons or just to destroy everything and to never let anything like us be. Let our gift be essentially God's last wish, wherein we destroy the burdensome aspects of being a deific figure and then ensure nothing else can be. And so it ends, it's funny, we talk about like this last death or this last Messiah, when instead really all that I feel is the sense of the last man. I just think Nietzsche. That's all I can think of is the letzte Mensch. That's it. I just think about the antithesis of, you saw this earlier on the timeline, and I hate to bring it back to the news, but we just saw Musk is fighting his little war with all these regulators as he's throwing rockets into the air, and they're able to get caught by his own devices. And it's particularly interesting where people are like, oh, is space exploration a Republican thing now? And it reiterates that battle from the 60s, billions for space, pennies for the hungry. And it's just, so you're telling me that the pinnacle of human technological achievement is worth less than the people who would say, actually, all that must be done is to live in a society that constantly just accepts, the disgusting, accepts that there is no will to power except maybe the will to, effetely or effeminately just goon out one last session before you waste your money on some kind of material good for freedom. And so that's the conclusion they come to is that, well, if we are in the age of the last man, well, then what better excuse then, rather than to wait for Zarathustra to speak, instead we must end ourselves, which is arguably more honorable in some respects to living in a world of the last man. But at the same time, it's dark. It's the embrace of this sort of nihilism that instead of raging against that good night and instead of fighting and trying to exist and to propagate meaning, it is better for us to just simply end, and that's it. No one talks to me as myself, and the voice comes to me like that of a dying person. As Nietzsche writes on The Last Man. But in this case, it's like we talk to ourselves because we are the only ones who can hear our voices in the midst of this great pain that emerges from our spines, because it tells us that in all aspects of our life, that we are groaning, that we are in pain, my back hurts. Therefore, rather than to philosophize any further, the only solution is to rebel and to end ourselves. And to me, that's just stupid.
Well, also to me, that's not even rebellion either. You hear that?
No, it's agreeing. It's letting the suffering win. And I mean, as Nietzsche writes in Beyond Good and Evil, everything around them decays and produces decays, and nothing will endure until the day after tomorrow, except one species of man, the incurably mediocre. The mediocre alone have prospect of continuing and propagating themselves. They will be the men of the future, the sole survivors. And these guys are saying, well, we don't want to be that, so why don't we just end it?
Well, it's like, I'm going to give a very crude metaphor and you're all going to go along for the ride. It's like you're being raped and you go far past identifying with the rapist and even enjoying it and saying, you know what he'd like if I brought my parents into this. That's kind of what they're doing, which is like, everything is so bad. I'm going to act like I'm rebelling against it and being a part of it. But what you're really doing, that's what acceleration is. It's going with the flow. It's submissive. It's a submissive way of being, just like nihilism is complete submissiveness. So you can't even, like, to rebel would be to treat the future as a vast undiscovered country, which is how a lot of us see it. That, you know, we are plagued by optimism, and I mean that as a positive. Like, for many of us, as black pilled as we say that we are, or how, you know, depressed we might be, it's like I do think people are more vibrantly and virally are fighting for the future, as opposed to someone like this. And I hope he doesn't take offense to this, but whatever. But it's more like, don't even bother. The future is darkness. You don't even want to go there. And if you do go there, that we're going to end up there, it's going to be bad. And a lot of these people, like you said, they create decay around them. There is no vitality. There is no lust for the future, or sees it as an undiscovered country. And I think that is that's irreconcilable between our differing schools of thought, in my opinion, at least. And I think with a lot of accelerationists, like even the, you know, accelerationists, like they're the techno optimism. I'm like, there is sort of a nihilism in there. Like, this is inevitable, so we might as well. Like AI, it's almost like that Rocco's Basilisk thing. Like, it's obvious AI is going to come and conquer us. So we might as well get there, like getting there as fast as possible. But that's why it's so very poorly described and outlined in these people. Anyway, I'm going off on a different topic.
No, but I think that there is something there to say is that what I can say in praise of at least the E or the effective accelerationist is, like, at least there's some bit of vitalistic drive in that compared to this.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah, I just
at
I
least
wish
there's a will to power, or at least a will to live.
Yeah, I think I would like. I've only read Mark Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto. I would have liked a bit more will to power in there, and less about, we need to let these pessimists, like, tell them to shut up. I kind of like that, but I'm like, I would like like, you need to capture how violent and dangerous it is, but also like that. You know, when I say it's an undiscovered country, it's going to be dangerous, and it needs to select for dangerous people, dangerous minds. And it's like, you know, some of the people advocating it, I'm like, I don't think you understand the journey that you're on. I think you think it's going to be, oh, it's going to be like Wall-E. We're just going to be in space and we're floating around. Like, no, it's like, your natural state is going to be insane. You're going to be in a maddening existence, but you should be excited about that and try and figure out a way to chart that course. Anyway, I don't want to get off on a whole accelerationism, tech accelerationism thing. Or maybe we do. I don't know, because we're done talking about spinal catastrophism, I think.
Well, to some extent, there is the postscript I want to get into. But the last section here, though, where he says, just as the euphoric recall of its own existence, philosophy, which Hartmann calls icy cognition, is insensitive as stone, is thus the temporal unfolding of naught, as naught but the self-explication of this end, and is the end announcing itself, though, through us, as it were. Reason is contemplated in spite of himself, in crystalline eternity, leaking backwards into the time-tainted present, such that neurulation, weaving up through the spines, the neural arches, and encumbering the human brain, is just how history pieces together its own terminus. It is the duty of the spine to destroy the universe, or a spine is the universe's method of acknowledging this duty to self-destruct. Hartmann proclaimed that even if humanity or a Terran successor species proved unfit for the task, then some alien exo-civilization would eventually elsewhere accomplish it. Standing upright, even as Kant realized as far back as 1771, the anatomical review of the cosmic curse of orthograde posture had never coincided with the interests of so-called life. Listening for outer space signals in the 1980s, Barker was evidently musing on the same set of problems. Given our own existence, it was clear that no other exo-civilization had yet accomplished intelligence's grand soteriological task. Barker remarked, eventually he would find the silence deafening. That's the end of the book, besides the postscript.
Yeah, there's something on page 218. Let me see here.
It's here.
Yeah,
This is the final thing here. What irks me about this is that they think the salvation of mankind, the salvation of existence in the midst of this global understanding of suffering and trauma, is to die, and to ensure that it can never happen again. Not to sound like I'm no expert. This Hartmann guy sounds like a real downer. Yeah, I mean,
this guy sounds like a real jerk.
but he's great at parties.
Oh, I saw William McDuff. AI is mid. Hey man, it's true. Today is when it was spoken. Oh yeah, and
So true.
also Vaughn here. Reject vitamin D. Embrace vitamin death.
That's what these guys want.
Yeah. Let me just see
These guys
here.
really don't have a spine for taking on life.
There's been a noticeable lack of spine riffing in the chat. I think people are spined out.
I know. There's no backbone for humor here.
Look, it's fallen to us. This I don't want to have to do this. I don't want to just say a bunch of spine stuff. That's what you people are supposed to do.
Mind may be at the end of its tether, which H.G. Wells wrote. Mind at the end of its tether, 1945. So this little postscriptum, it's literally it's a few pages. We can just read through it if there's anything interesting in there. But let's just go for it.
There's one part here that that talks about alien life in the universe,
go for it.
and we kind of touched on this in a previous episode. Might have even been the first one where it talks about and this is one interesting aspect of spinal catastrophism that I see paralleled in our spaces when I'm writing about this in that Vanguard's journal article I mentioned before about I spoke recently to a very interesting figure online by the name of Space Age Maximalist, and he was citing another physicist, Leviathan, I think his name was, talking about a new model of the quantum realm. I believe it's called quantum kinetics or quantum subkinetics, but it's basically saying that here's a model of the universe that doesn't require the Big Bang. And it's the ether theory of the universe, and it's a scientific understanding of that. I won't get off on the whole thing here, but the idea that the universe is mostly dead, it's dead space, and what exists in the universe is hostile to life. That's sort of the prevailing model right now, and this is the opposite of that. And you actually see this in spinal catastrophism, this idea that the universe is in fact teeming with life, and it means life not just in a quantum sense where there's activity, but rather there is conscious life everywhere, residing in nebula. And in fact, many of these natural universal phenomena that we might see, the cosmological phenomena like nebula, like fucking black holes, might be a more advanced stage of life, or there's intelligent life woven into that some way. So the universe is, rather than being dead, actually vibrant with life at every single level. We just can't perceive it with our senses. But this is kind of what he gets into here. I'll just read it. It's a bit long, but this is kind of the last thing I had. He says, a persistent theme throughout our secret history of spinal catastrophism has been the dubious relation, even telic antagonism, between the cerebrospinal and the vegetative automatic functions of the complexified organism, CNS and ANS, so the central nervous system and ANS, the former embedded within the latter. Such evolutionary nesting of separate functional systems or adaptive complexification via endosymbiosis has recently been argued to be a plausible astrobiological universal for the evolution of life forms across all exobiospheres. In a paper entitled The Intellgience Paradox, a team of nutritional scientists proposed that intellection is essentially self-canceling. Referring to hormesis, they claim that continual environmental stressors are behind the evolution of intelligence. That's kind of a way of saying that intelligence emerges from trauma, or intelligence evolves in an environment where it is forced to evolve. Okay, a lot of people might not even reject that. To adapt via a feed-forward and anticeptive control, producing even more resilient responses to the perturbing environment. Intelligence, as the terrestrial pinnacle of this creeping process of incremental chronognostic range, then ensconces itself through seismic activities, capturing the whole Earth system in its intentional energy dispersal systems, collapsing the natural into the artifactual. This, the authors of the Intelligence Paradox argue, reaches a level of aptitude, or a tipping point, in technologically mature civilizations where intelligence essentially alleviates the environmental stressors that in the first place drove its evolution. So he's talking about how this is where he really goes to the next level, where it's not even natural that humans would reach the level where we could destroy the universe, because as we evolve our technology, as we have more complete dominion over the earth, we will remove ourselves successfully from the very stressors that forced us to evolve these technologies, even our own biology in the first place. So we will become completely static, which is why we must actively choose to advance further. And that's kind of what he was saying here, which he's not describing an emergent natural phenomena. He's not saying that it is the destiny of every intelligence to rise to the level that you can become that eternal conflagration that destroys all life. You must you must proactively choose and set that as your north star to evolve your entire civilization to become that. And he kind of says, and intelligence is self-limiting. It erases the very contexts that create and maintain it. It emerges to amplify and intensify universal energy dispersal by creating its own supernormal metabolic utopia before passing on the energetic baton to less retentive and more excellent systems. So he's also saying that maybe the intelligences that we do discover, these intelligences throughout the universe, are ones that have achieved such a level that, we talked about this earlier in the book, where it's our destiny to just become floating spines, floating skulls and spines. And I had said, well, why is this at that level? Why even have a spine? Why wouldn't the spine branch off into 1,000 different directions if we're supposed to be
Yeah, why not be rhizomatic?
yeah, exactly, precisely. Why, maybe he's just getting too locked into his own imagery, but like, why wouldn't we become some, unified, crazy, fucking galactic spider web that's made of gas or something?
And also later on, the argument he makes is essentially that intelligence is self-limiting in part because, it is a high caloric thing to maintain a larger brain, and of course, the body that would allow it to be intelligent enough to do so. So they say it's an evolutionary problem. But on top of that, it would be almost impossible for any civilization to get intelligent enough to create the tools necessary to end the world. And then he starts talking about healthcare costs, resource depletion, environmental damage, that odds are we will never make it past, what little bit of economic and technological progress we've made. Just as in a similar vein, he says the Lancet recently published a report calling low back pain a complication, just like obesity, that is skyrocketing owing to sedentary modern lifestyles of developed countries, a major global challenge. The economic and clinical costs of obesity in the United States could be nearing an eye-watering $200 billion per annum. Whilst there's a cycle for that, I can't say on YouTube. Whilst the socioeconomic burden of back pain upon the U.S. from a loss of productivity to combined healthcare bills has recently received almost identical annual estimates. This make NASA's 2013 budget at $17.7 billion look paltry in magnitude. And then, of course, it talks about climate change, and also that intelligence and upward spines are self-canceling, just in part because rather than doing anything else, we decide to just drink too much Pepsi and go into the stars. So this galactic stomach ache of the Fermi paradox solution, essentially just that all of a sudden we will live in a world where we are disappearing up our own brain stems. Freud's pleasure principle triumphs over reality. We narrowcast human interest stories to each other rather than broadcasting the messages of universal peace. And again, some very liberal libtard shit. The spectacle of Homo sapiens disappearing up their own brain stems would indeed look like Bernal's or Burroughs' humans of the future, spinal cord trailing tadpoles. Of course, Leroy Goran and others are already worried about our exodus into our own externalizations. Since Augsburg, such, quote, body liberation was understood as the principle behind intelligence's conquest. The tenebrous implication, however, has always been that at the extreme it becomes a tendency to liberate oneself from existence, whether through obesity or fakery, virtual reality, the digital noosphere, porn, you name it. Jailbreak from life is nothing but an embrace of death. Blumenberg, indeed, had already prophesied the deleteriously decreasing reality contact in our own egress into our own ectopic neuronal exoskeleton, whether that be the digital, whether that be our computers, whether that be our own made-up bullshit about the extensions of man. An escape is up our brain stems because a post-normal technoscience multiplies the artifactual to a point where it is almost impossible to distinguish the real and the false. We're kind of getting close there with certain AI video imagery. Reality isn't what it used to be. We retreat into an inner space, Again, we self and auto-amputate because we excrete it all over the globe. Such an implosive trajectory, of course, has been proposed as a solution to the Fermi's paradox because we will all inevitably kill ourselves. And so, we get a little bit of the thirst for annihilation, but also at the same time, this little postscriptum kind of more or less just concludes that depth is memory, and intelligence always interferes with our ability to perceive time and time in and of itself, both in our own perception but also outside of it, and that idealism and natural history has only been recapitulated to make sense of things that are not natural, that do not fit within our own models of natural sciences and philosophy. And it ends with this little quote here: "Man is the embodied impossibility. He is the animal that lives anyway," or so Blumenberg said. The truth of this statement has yet to be determined. Mind may well be at the end of its bony tether. So again, it ends on a particularly dark note. But however, I see this last postscriptum and parts of the sacral inception to really be the teeing up for his second book, which came out, I think, last year, about humanity's ability to perceive its own extinction. But it's incredibly nihilistic.
Well, see, even that quote there, "Man is the embodied impossibility. He is the animal that lives anyway." Like, I could read that on its own, and it sounds very optimistic. It sounds it's very poignant, in my opinion. But I guess you could read that as like man is something that should not be. Like, I guess you could take that two different ways. But I don't know. Like, I can't escape the sense that Moynihan, well, not an idiot. He's very well read, very well researched. He's a serious guy, but I think he's taking a very twisted view of some of this stuff. Maybe not from Schopenhauer, as we've established. This is an anti-Schopenhauer chat we've got going here, but I don't know. Like, I think he can take some of these, like you had said, he takes the natural philosophy guys and he removes them from their own ambitions, their own context, and saying that, like, taking their stuff and using it against them, which is, I guess, interesting. And that's really what the CCRU guys like to do. It's like, no, this is death of the author. You thank you. I'm going to take your thing and use it for my own purposes.
Yeah, like I cannot stand this whole idea that to jailbreak from life is nothing but an embrace of death. Like, well, I mean, I don't wish to jailbreak from life. I think that life is worth living, at least to some extent. I mean, all of human history, outside of a few death cults or a few Gnostic strange sects in the early first centuries that opted to castrate themselves and to never have sex, they all died out. I don't think that there is something there's something very, very like this orgiastic, like, let's get it in now before we all die, sort of the 120 days of Sodom. It's just it doesn't bode well with me. And I would like to think that even if I weren't a man of a particular faith, I would think that I wouldn't agree with this ending either. But like I said, if you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe in something, and I have respect to some of my more vitalist or non-Christian friends than some of my other colleagues do, but I see them and I know that they have a belief system that still has this teleological bounding that says I must leave something behind for my children and my future and my people. This is just like, no, the best thing that we can do is just end humanity.
Well, it's also, it's neither collectivist nor individualist, or it's hyper collectivist in the sense that, like, humanity is like one organism, but it's like one bioweapon. We're like xenomorphs in that sense. And so, it depends if you even embrace that whatsoever. There's I hesitate to even bring this up, but if you do go into the natural sciences, I know J.F. Garepi, some people have their opinions of J.F. Garepi, but he actually wrote this very fascinating book called The Revolutionary Phenotype. As far as I know, it's a theory all of his own, but it's based off of RNA world theory, which, from the starting point of that, you have to understand that's based on DNA. And so all of humanity is just a varied but collective way for DNA to propagate itself over time. Everything from your own biology, races, sexes, whatever, is just a way that your genetic code has evolved this armor around itself to propagate itself in the future, and that the current human form is the most effective way it can do that, but it's always trying to find a more effective way. And so there's nothing essentially human about that, but it I don't even know if I want to go off on the whole thing here. It's a very interesting theory that proposes a future where I won't even get into it because we'll be here for another 45 fucking minutes. But there's a way that I see where people could end up at this sort of thinking, where everyone's looking at it from our side of the pond by saying, what about gender? What about race? What about the family genetics? What about the blood memory and legacy and all that stuff? And it's like, no, it rejects all of that, or it just exists insofar as they're kind of A/B testing aspects of humanity to like make us into the most effective collective bioweapon. Anyway, that's probably
No, I think that there's a lot there to plot to imply, and because again, it is something that you can definitely look at and you would say, huh, well, this really. I think that there's a pretty heavy degree of seriousness in this conclusion. Like you create this history of trauma, you create this sorry, I just saw something in chat.
Is it tree surgeons?
Yeah, it's just sorry, it broke me. Well done, tree surgeon. You got me.
I'm just gonna put this. I'm just gonna put this up on the board, and let's just, I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna. I'm gonna put it there on the coffee table and say, how about that?
I think I would be interested in reading that book. But to get back before I lose my bearing again, very rare that I get to do that, but well done. I would simply say that I think he's pretty seriously for this conclusion. But again, it's this like almost Reddit tier Rust Cole True Detective. Like, I'm still gonna live because I got books to write, and I'm too compliant with my human programming to live. But we should be ready to thirst for annihilation and just end it all. And it's
yeah. Sorry. Oh, we got one here from Bulbous Trom Cruise. Like that. Ryan Young also has a good point. How do you marry the spiritual into that? I don't know. Your instincts are meant to guide you towards God's plan. Yeah, so I think he was referring to the whole thing that I was just saying, that it's more of a biologist's and maybe an anthropologist perspective. And I don't think you can. That's where it gets tricky. You could say that that's like a worst case scenario, what I was describing, sort of a Brave New World times 10 type future, where humans have pursued transhumanism, let's just call it that, to such a degree where you begin to strip away, you're losing your soul. So that's like the worst case scenario, but they are conscious decisions in the same way that I think this sort of thinking could be destructive, in the sense that it is a mind virus. We could choose as a civilization to pursue this course, but in that process, we would become something truly inhuman. So, at the very least, I think in Spinal Catastrophism, it gives a defense of, this is what we want to do. We want to create us as, inhuman bioweapons. And in brackets, here's why that's a good thing, right? Some other people would try and actually hide that in their ideology. This actually respects the reader enough to say, no, but that's what we should. Not only is that something that we're destined to be, it's something that we should want to become. Whereas at least with the revolutionary phenotype, it's more of a warning. Like, this is where we could end up. Yeah, at 1,000,000 years in the future, not 1,000,000. That's too crazy. Like 10,000 years in the future, if we continue along a transhumanist path and surrender our natural reproductive capacity to artificial or synthetic means, that it eventually just starts to utilize us as its own sexual reproduction system, and by that point, we're just like the theory was that, pre-DNA, there was a type of protein called RNA, and that was called the RNA world hypothesis, that there was no DNA, it was just RNA that was all over the world. At some point, DNA emerged and took over, and the evidence showed that DNA started off as almost a reproductive organ of RNA. It was coded with a task to help it reproduce, because we utilize things in everyday life to help us reproduce, right? That's all we want to do. But eventually, it becomes so effective at reproducing. There's a schism that occurs where the DNA becomes its own entity and starts utilizing RNA as its own type of reproduction, because we have RNA inside of us, but it is a subservient sort of protein. Whereas DNA, at some point, even though it came later, became the primary one. So the idea was, in the future, we as humans create a process or system where we offload our reproductive capabilities into something like IVF plus AI plus, this other construct that over the course of hundreds of years evolves into something that just uses us for its own reproduction. And that at that point, we're something less than human. We're just like RNA. We're a protein in service of this other complex organism that we've created and become a slave to. So that's the idea. But to get there, there's a lot of steps you must take, that you must consciously take to get there. It's not automatic. It's not a given that we would end there. And that's why I think something like this this is a proposal. This spinal catastrophism is a proposal to choose enthusiastic self-destruction. And I think is like, you can take part in this and look at it, but make the decision to consciously rebel against this, or, the construct that would eventually take over human reproduction. Now, I gave people a lot of stuff there. I did a very, very bare bones summary of that book, which I actually quite like. And I'm going to check out that sequel book that Tree Farmer gave us.
Oh, yeah. This sounds almost Freudian. Well, a lot of this, Freud is cited throughout this entire book, but it's been a particularly interesting read. This is, like you said, Dimes, a proposal, one in which I think that you and I are going to reject, but also that there are some interesting tools in the first two sections that I think have, maybe on a theory cell basis of things, that you can dive into and discuss.
Sorry, what was that? I was just looking at the chat.
Oh, yeah, no, just that, even though we may disagree with this proposal, I still think that there are interesting tools in here for us to look into.
Well, like I said, you like that there's a movement and a momentum in this sort of thinking. And I think you can actually look at the end point of this, but look at the beginning of it, look at the first two parts and chart. And that's why I think the fact that we went into such detail here, I think you can pinpoint the area, the inflection point where it goes off in a different direction. However, there's a lot of stuff at the beginning and a lot of stuff about, the weaving together of, the spine rebelling, or the human posture rebelling against the chaos of the earth. Like there's something there. There's something there in the importance of trauma, but it's, I don't think the destiny is just to repunish the universe, but there's stuff in there. And I think, and we've done this before on our show, and other people have done this as well, but you can dissect these inquiries and these criticisms, just like Marxist stuff. Like I don't swipe everything that comes from the world of Marxism, the post left off the table. I don't treat it as toxic, because there's some unique investigations that are made. But it goes off in the weeds. You can end up with some really kooky stuff, which we're going to get into in the future. But some people will say it's dumb. I don't think it's dumb. I don't think it's written by dumb people. I don't think it's written by even evil people. I think that's too easy. I think I think it's a necessary consequence of our historical period, but it's something we can work with. And I don't think just rejecting it is going to stop it from existing. And like we were saying before, something like this is going to have an impact on our world, and ignoring the organisms lurking above us in the noosphere aren't going to rob them of power. And that's why I think it behooves those of us who are psychotic enough to even give a shit about any of this, because normal people don't. Normal people are all, fucking with a hoop and a stick at 10:55 p.m. at night. God bless them. But there's people out there who I think if they have an interest in something like this, you can perhaps redeem part of it. And due to, again, I'm not trying to be too pointy here, due to Moynihan, what he's doing to all these other great thinkers.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. There's plenty to work with, plenty to take. I don't think you need to embrace the conclusion. I've already got one giant pain in my back. It's called my wife.
The void? Buddy, that's my wife.
Oh, so true, Owen. So true.
Oh, we got to record deepness, but what if you threw the lemons back at life? What if you didn't need the damn lemons? The joy, Vulpus Persona, it's joyous trauma is the reality principle of joy. I mean, I'm impressed by the
I want
serious
Marie
comments.
Kondo to like look at like a photo or like just hold up a human spine. This brings joy.
Man, we gotta blow the dust off of her. Let's bring her back in the mix.
This does not bring joy.
This does not spark joy. That was what it was.
Yeah, this does not spark joy. There were two people who sent some lovely super chats over at Entropy. One of them was just Seneca saying, I hate my spine, I hate my spine, I hate my spine, I hate my spone. The source of all pain is my spine. The source of all my pain, my spine. Well, I appreciate your slam poetry, Seneca. It's always appreciated. And then Frederick 1483 sends $20 and he says, we love our spinal catastrophism. Well, Frederick, we appreciate your generosity in supporting the wonderful show Do You Even Read? So thank you very much.
Oh, we got Ziz Hunter here just saying, creating Delusian offspring. If you know, you know.
So true.
And we also have someone recommending we look at Rodney Dangerfield. And also Vaughn
I get
here.
no respect.
But what I was saying before, Vaughn here says, baptize it with theology, considering Christ's body and his suffering. Here's a Willie McDuff. I call my wife depth as memory. Oh yeah, here. Did Dimes just call me farmer? I'll have you know I have a tree doctorate. That's tree surgeon. I got his name wrong.
Well,
I always mention, community members on the show, and I don't think I've ever gotten a fucking name right.
It's gotten to a point where I know some of these names, and then I'm like, oh, I have to find out, is this the same name that you have on Twitter or Telegram and not YouTube? And so it's like there's 4 or 5 different aliases I'm trying to like keep up with, and I'm like, man, just say who you are.
Yeah. The joke in our spaces is every group chat you're added to, it's the same like 100 guys, but in reality, it's the same 25 guys with different usernames.
It really is. It really is. So be sure to sit up straight. The show will continue on. I hate to break it to you, but maybe if you're interested and you've never read it before and you like that old Jordan Peterson copy pasta of explain Deleuze to me or I'll kill you. That's actually what we're going to do next. We are going to Dimes gets to read it for the first time, so you're in for a fun ride, and I get to reread it for the first time in some years.
I've never read it. I've read people that reference it, and I think I'm going to use this as an excuse to mention some Slavoj Zizek, just to kind of liven it up, because apparently I'm the last motherfucker who's read this book. Everyone's read it. And I'm just so I'm going to try and keep it interesting for people and show how some of these ideas have evolved, because that gets really trippy. And we covered Zizek like before on Blood Satellite, but just one book. And I think he's a relevant enough figure to treat it seriously. And the other thing is that, like with Spinal Catastrophism, in my opinion, it's very difficult to find coverage of this content that is viewable by a human, by which I mean you're stuck with a bunch of like Hegelians trying to explain Deleuze or explain Zizek or explain these ideas, but they're deeply invested in making it sound more complicated than it is. Like if you can imagine a fucking MAGA communist trying to explain Spinal Catastrophism, it's a goddamn fucking nightmare. But you need someone to like actually bring this down, like make it understandable instead of trying to make it sound like,
That's
it's
what we're here for.
an even bigger hall of mirrors. So that's what we're going to do with this. And there's not a lot of that out there. And if you try and look for it, you wonder if they even understand it, or if they're just trying to talk and just layer over more complexity to make it sound smart. But anyway, so we're actually going to make it, we're going to make it fun. We're going to make it sexy.
We're going to make it fun. We're going to make it sexy. And we're going to be reading Anti-Oedipus. Sorry, kids.
Ooh, sorry. This, you like Prudentialist, other show, and you have to watch this too.
Boy.
Anyway, that's all. I think that's probably.
I think it's really all I have to say for this section.
I think we gave. I'm very happy with the way this came out, and I think, when I covered it before, it was too short. I think you need to really chart a course through the thought pattern to arrive at a conclusion that doesn't just sound, too wacky to the point where it's unusable. And so I'm very happy with the way we went about this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We would like to ensure that any sort of philosophy text that we break down is going to be entertaining, and that does not encourage you to take steroids for the opposite sex when you're done. This is not a bread tube show. We encourage you to be as virile as possible. We don't want you to troon out for Patreon dollars, and we are going to make these philosophers understandable to you in ways that do not require you to be a raging leftist.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to watch ContraPoints. No,
you don't need to watch Cuck Philosophy.
Yeah. So who is that a real person? Who is that? Who's Cuck Philosophy?
I don't know. They're all a future 41%er. I don't know.
There's a lot of trannies who are into philosophy, but only politically, which is interesting. Like, they never apprehend.
That's how you know they're men.
Exactly. Sorry, let me see here. Take it for our guys only. Under our blood red goon. I'm gonna keep reading these comments. I can't do it. We gotta get going.
What was that one? What's that one song? Right Red Hand, right? Is that the song?
By Nick?
Yeah, Nick Cave and the Bad Steeds. But instead it's the Blood Red Goon.
And a blood red goon. Nick Cave is kind of like I like him as like the Nicolas Cage of rock music. Like, almost anyone can do a pretty serviceable impression of him, but it doesn't stop it from being good.
That's true. The first time I ever heard that song was in an episode, I want to say like the first or second season of the X-Files.
I mean, you hear that song a lot. I've heard that song like 3 or 4 times and stuff, but he's got such a huge corpus of work and so many good albums. I don't really like a lot of his recent stuff, but I was going back to listen to I think it was Abattoir Blues. And it was it was the one where it's almost like a gospel album. It was like this big, full of like choirs and stuff, and it was just such a curveball from him. Was it Abattoir Blues? It might have been that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
Anyway, this will quickly descend into.
Yeah, so
it was Abattoir Blues. That's what I'm talking about. Guys, check.
Go.
It's a trip. It's a wild album.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, Dimes, where can people find you and your wonderful work?
Yes, thank you. Bloodsalad.ca is where you can find all the full episodes of Blood Salad, and the clips and everything else. You can also read on Substacks my work. It's not the podcast, it's actual articles. Vanguardistjournal.substack.com. And also, Prudentialist was so kind to mention this at the top of the show. Our store, goodsuffer.com. We recently partnered with a very popular individual named Micah Paul, who's producing artisan style our latest shirt, the felted Lindy Waffen shirt. So the entire process of designing, producing, and shipping that shirt is done 100% within our space by our guys. It's a very high quality product that we're really proud of. So goodsuffer.com, check that out, and that'll be it for me.
Wonderful. Well, I'll be live tomorrow, and as always, every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. I am live with Gio Panichetti, my other Canadian co-host. I happen to be the only American around these parts, and Digital Archipelago will be live. We'll be talking about a Condylus article as well as the other fun stuff that goes on in our Twitter timeline. Along with that, I will be hopefully getting some more scripted content out. I have been chipping away at a lot of essays lately, and I'm hoping I can get one done before this damn month ends. And it'll be probably about 10,000 words, so hopefully it'll be worth the effort when I'm done with that. But like I said, Dimes and I are going to continue this next month after we get some reading done, because that one is a little bit of a longer book than this one. But we will be covering Anti-Oedipus, and it'll be a good time. But until then, you can find me on YouTube, you can find me on Rumble, Substack, Prudentialist.substack.com. And yeah, as Hunter, you're absolutely right. We are spining off. This has been the conclusive. My discs are herniated, my lower back hurts. The burden of this book has been fun to carry. But alas, we can become disembodied and move on to the next text.
All right. Bye, everyone. It was a great